I thought she was just cheating on me. But then I realized she was putting my entire company at risk. And the most shocking part? Who she was doing it with. My name is Jonathan Mercer. 56 years old. I built everything from scratch, an IT consulting firm, 48 employees, a quiet office in Charlotte, 2 cars, 1 son in college. My wife, Evelyn. 21 years together. Not perfect but solid. Or so I thought. Our house sits just outside the woods. Not big, but with a glassed-in porch where I drank my Sunday coffee and skimmed investment reports. She'd sit nearby, always with a novel I never remembered the name of. The change started subtly. Like someone had rearranged familiar objects in a room. Her smile was still there, just rehearsed. Not masking irritation, but holding back something else. Something colder. I'm not the paranoid type. But I spent a decade in corporate intelligence. And lies don't smell like smoke or perfume. They smell like missing fingerprints. She stopped leaving her phone in the kitchen. Stopped talking about work. Started predicting too accurately when I'd be stuck late at the office. So I ran a remote trace on our home's Wi-Fi logs. She'd been logging into Zoom at 2:47 a.m. Again at 3:12. Camera off. On the 4th night I didn't sleep. I checked into a hotel instead. Accessed the camera I'd installed in the study the week before. What I saw wasn't a man. It was her, alone. With a tablet. Accessing a virtual desktop tied to my company's core systems. She was copying files from an encrypted sector she wasn't supposed to have access to. She'd breached it. I reached out to someone I hadn't spoken to in years, a former federal prosecutor turned private investigator. He watched the footage and asked only one thing. You realize she's not doing this for herself, right? And that's when it hit me. She wasn't cheating. She was working for someone. I didn't go home the next day. Not out of fear, but necessity. I needed distance to think clearly. Coincidentally, or maybe guided by instinct, I had already agreed to meet a client in Raleigh. A rare thing for me. I usually handled strategy remotely, but this meeting now became the perfect pretext. I moved my flight up by a day. Said nothing to Evelyn. She didn't ask. Just sent. Drive safe. And see you tomorrow evening. No trace of surprise. No curiosity about why I left without a word. That was the first entry in my internal ledger. She wasn't worried. She wasn't confused. She expected it. I booked a room near the university campus. Not for comfort, just for the privacy to work. Alone, with my laptop, I logged into the back-end systems at Mercer and Fox, my company. Quietly, methodically, I accessed the logs. We're not just another IT firm. We handle critical integrations, HIPAA compliance, defense-level encryption. Some of our clients you don't name in email. The segment she accessed was one of our highest security zones. Internally, it didn't even have a name, only a number, 118 Delta. 6 people have access. She wasn't one of them. But she got in, remotely, through a disguised tunnel that mimicked routine system diagnostics. I checked timing, IP metadata, mouse behavior, latency. This wasn't a script. It was a human. And next to her access, another fingerprint appeared. One I'd seen before. 7 years ago. In Richmond. I was consulting on the restructuring of a telecom holding. One of the vendors, Archetype Gridworks, filed for bankruptcy mid-contract. Huge debts. Fuzzy books. Supply chain gaps. When I reviewed their licenses, I found several had been granted through shadow entities. The trail led to a Delaware shell company. And from there, to a name, Richard Geller. Officially, he'd left the market in 2012. No bids, no filings, no records. But his digital trace in that Richmond case was undeniable. I reported it. Then the project was closed. I was reassigned. Archetype was liquidated. Back then, I thought it was just noise. Now I knew, Geller hadn't vanished. He'd gone underground. I checked Evelyn's calendar. 2 appointments. One with a realtor, a dead end. The other, lunch at Halcyon downtown. A place we used to go on anniversaries. Now, it was just her. Or was it? I accessed nearby security footage through a favor I was owed. She entered at exactly 12:03 p.m. Hair up, no lipstick, plain coat over a modest dress. She sat near the window. 3 minutes later, a man joined her. Tall. Gray hair. Long overcoat. Calm. He didn't check the menu. Didn't glance around. She placed a small black case on the table. He picked it up. Slipped it into his inner coat pocket. No drama. Just choreography. It would have passed for a lover's secret if not for one thing. Just before he left, Evelyn looked up, directly at the camera. 1 second. No more. And that second was enough. She knew I was watching. She wanted me to know. The next morning, I received an envelope. No return address. No sender. Inside, a printed contract, an agreement between Mercer and Fox and an entity I'd never heard of. The signature line bore my name. Dated next Monday. The problem? I never signed it. And the client doesn't exist. I kept the envelope. Thick gray paper, folded with precision. The document inside smelled like printing ink, not home. That mattered. Home smells accidental. Print smells commissioned. The contract looked legitimate. Format, language, signature, mine. Even the slight slant on the R I make when I sign in a hurry. But I knew I hadn't signed this. Not Monday. Not ever. The entity listed was Camberlight Therapeutics. No official registry matched the name. But the domain had been purchased, a week ago. Swiss hosting. The language inside was too clean. Too direct. Like someone tried to write the idea of a contract without understanding the tone real risk carries. At first, I thought it was a trap. Then I wondered if it wasn't meant for me at all. I got back to Charlotte late at night. The house was dark, but not empty. It wasn't a sound I heard. It was a shift in the air. Someone was in the kitchen, drinking from a water bottle in the dark. I didn't go in. I drove on. Downtown, I parked by a 24-hour pharmacy and called someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Michael Shivers. My former partner on a 2009 federal contract for cybersecurity infrastructure. Back then, a leak derailed the entire operation. One of our embedded analysts sold the scheme to the press, and someone took the fall. Not me. But not without my help. I knew Shivers hadn't forgotten. That's why he answered on the first ring. Voice calm. Too calm. Like a surgeon who no longer has the right to feel. I said just one thing. You knew she was working with Geller? He didn't ask who she was. Didn't pause long. Just said, Are you sure it's her? I didn't understand what he meant. Not right away. But the next morning, at 6:40 a.m., I received an email from an address that had been inactive for years. An old client. Or rather, a cover for one. There was only a photo. Me. In an office. 2014. In the background, a woman with long dark hair, business suit, laptop open. Her face is blurred, turned slightly. Not Evelyn. But close. Zoom in, and something nags at you. Not what you think you're seeing, what you've been made to remember. Below it, one sentence. You think you met her at the bookstore. What if she met you in the archive? I didn't know who sent it. But I understood one thing. This story didn't start with the marriage. And it wasn't about infidelity. It started long before that. The next morning, I unlocked a safety deposit box I hadn't touched since 2015. Inside, there were 3 things. A SIM card with no name. A yellow sticky note. If it goes sideways, call him first. And a memory card. When I plugged it into my laptop, the system popped up. Last accessed, 11 days ago. User E.Mercer. The SIM card was active. The number didn't register anywhere, not in public directories, not in carrier logs. It had been prepared in advance, not for a call, but for the call. For what would happen if everything went sideways? I slid it into an old burner phone. No contacts. Just one incoming message. No sender, no timestamp. If you're reading this, it means he's surfaced again. You have no more than 5 days. Don't call me. Call Tom. Tom. There was only one Tom connected to this layer of things. Tom Baines, a former special operations agent under the Department of Commerce. Went private years before I started my own operations. We crossed paths once, back in 2010, at a meeting on cyber infrastructure protection. One thing I knew about Tom. You don't call him twice. If you dial, you'd better be ready to finish it. I didn't call. Not right away. First, I went to the office. Early morning, Saturday. Empty lot. But the third floor had one light on. When I walked in, Melissa, my executive director, was there. The kind of person you don't share personal things with, but trust just enough to let your gut rest. She wasn't surprised. She just said, "I figured you'd show." I said nothing. Then, "Did you know Evelyn accessed the vault?" She hesitated. A real pause. Then nodded. "I saw the trace. I assumed you allowed it." I wanted to believe her. But by now, I believed nothing. That evening, I crossed a line. A moral one. I reactivated a closed monitoring protocol I'd only used once, back when we lost data in a breach 4 years ago. This time, I used it on my wife. I tracked her not through her phone, but through the car's onboard system. It remembered her last routes. One stood out, an address she'd never mentioned. Someone lived there. A young man named Alex Harper. 20 years old. A student. Same university my son attends. I didn't go right away. I did a background pull. Tuition, paid by an anonymous party. Apartment, registered to a third-party trust. Remote work contract, vague. Only one photo online, taken at a science symposium in Chicago. He's in the front row. On stage, Evelyn. Wearing a speaker's badge. Caption says, 2018. She told me that trip was to visit a friend. Apparently, the friend was a grad student. Or a cover story. I went that night. Didn't knock. Just stood outside the window, watching the cold glow of his laptop in a dark room. I didn't know who he was. A lover? An agent? A courier? But I knew this. When I accessed his encrypted profile, one of the folders was labeled Mercer John. Next to it, my son's birthdate. I called Tom. He didn't answer. 30 seconds later, a text arrived. "You called too late. He's already inside." I sat in the car across from Alex's building. Rain tapped against the windshield with a soft, clinical rhythm, like each drop measured the silence. Nothing happened. But I didn't leave. I had to accept a simple truth. This wasn't just a boy my wife might have slept with. He was a vessel. A carrier. And possibly, a mirage. From the outside, it all looked predictable. Wife. Affair. Husband. Suspicion. Drama. But I knew now, this wasn't about infidelity. It was about control. I didn't go into Alex's building. Whatever I'd find there, it was already curated. There were more questions than answers, but I knew one thing for sure: he wasn't my son. He knew about my son. Or was connected to him. And that was worse. I turned around and drove home. Not to a safe house. Home, as in the place we used to share. The house that once smelled like coffee and leather. Now it smelled like vacancy. The door was unlocked. Still. Quiet. On the kitchen table, an empty mug. Still warm. Inside it, a ring. Her wedding band. No note. No metaphor. Just an absence. I stepped out onto the porch to exhale. And that's when I saw him. Thomas. Our son. Standing near the edge of the street, under the trees. No call. No text. He was just there. Watching. Not the house, just the horizon. I walked toward him. He didn't move. Did you know? I asked. He waited a moment. Then looked at me. There was no fear in his eyes. No anger. I knew you were both hiding more than you said. I didn't understand what he meant by both. We sat in the basement. The place we used to keep old archives. I pulled out the hard drive, the one from the safety deposit box. Thomas watched. Then asked, "Why didn't you ever tell me?" "Tell you what?" "About Mississippi. 1998, 19 missing records. And a signature that shouldn't have been there." I stared at him. Slowly. He knew. It was before the marriage. Before the company. Something I'd buried. A contract where the front man took the fall. But the signature, mine. I thought I'd closed that chapter. Legally, yes. But now it had returned, as my son. "Where did you get it?" "It was sent to me. 3 months ago. No message. Just the scan." And then I understood. This wasn't Evelyn's revenge. It wasn't Geller's scheme. It was a reminder. They knew I'd forget. They knew I was softening. They knew the only thing stronger than my fear of collapse was the instinct to protect my son. And they bet everything on that. 2 days later, I opened an archived protocol buried deep in our system. File name: Retainer Protocol _01. Inside, a voice file. Encrypted. Mine. "If you're hearing this, they've gone after your son. That means leverage wasn't enough. That means you're going to have to take control back." The file was named Retainer Protocol _01. It wasn't a code name. It was a beacon. One-time activation. No retries. Jonathan entered the authorization key. A voice played, his own, recorded years earlier on a night when everything unraveled in Palo Alto. The voice was strained, deliberate. He told himself, "If you're hearing this, they've gone too far. This isn't about data. It's pressure. And you know what to do when pressure becomes personal." Inside the file was a map, not of places, but of systems. 3 access points. 1 cascade. And a single name. Karen Brower. She had vanished in 2016 after a quiet audit inside Archetype Gridworks. He'd assumed she disappeared. In truth, she had just stepped aside to observe. Her name had reappeared as the administrator of a fund used to pay for Alex's housing. Which meant only one thing: she knew more than Geller allowed. And now, she was waiting. Jonathan flew to New Haven. No warnings, no calls. The address was real. A top-floor apartment above an old bookstore. When she opened the door, she seemed to know exactly who he was. She remarked that he had come alone, just as she expected. He didn't answer. He stepped inside and sat down across from her. A paper map lay on the table. 3 marked exits. She explained they were failovers for those still clinging to control. But he wasn't there for them. She understood that too. He was after something deeper. The origin. Who had handed Evelyn the signal? Why she had moved now? She spoke like someone beyond strategy, naming consequences, not choices. Alex, she explained, wasn't an asset or a messenger. He was a link. Between what had been stolen from Archetype and what Evelyn had embedded inside Jonathan's system. He had never been meant to survive. Geller had given him up, out of fear. Fear that Jonathan wouldn't just dig deeper, he would dig wider. That was enough. Karen had made her move. Now it was his turn. Returning to Charlotte, Jonathan initiated Protocol 7 Delta, one of the oldest and most silent responses. Not an attack. An exclusion. Geller didn't disappear. He was disconnected. All his credentials, digital presence, and keys were rendered temporarily non-existent. Alive, but unreachable. That was the strike. The following day, an email arrived. From Evelyn. The subject line read, "Don't look for me." The message contained a single line. She wrote that he had taught her how to defend herself, And now, it was her turn. Attached was an archive. Inside, a copy of an old project. His project. Except in this version, his name was gone. As if he had never existed. The system issued a notification. Author access revoked. New owner, Evelyn M. What she thought she could keep began to unravel. After Protocol 7 Delta was activated, the system Evelyn believed she controlled began to behave differently. Her commands no longer executed. Admin rights vanished. The archives she once accessed returned nothing but empty shells. She believed Geller had given her everything. In truth, he gave her only what had been permitted. Jonathan had embedded silent tears, immune to any query except one, his voice. One of Evelyn's enablers had been with Jonathan since the company's founding, Andrew Halstead. Co-founder. Friend. The man who once held joint banking access and helped carry his parents' caskets. It was Andrew who opened the core archives, using operational necessity as justification. Evelyn had slept with him. Not out of desire, out of calculation. Because he was weak. Because he believed she needed support. He thought choosing her meant securing a future without Jonathan. He was wrong. Alex had returned to Charlotte. He came on his own. He found Jonathan in the old office, the one from before the investors, before the IPO. A metal cabinet stood near the far wall. Inside, old drives. One labeled 1999 Montano. Among the files, a photograph. A woman. Name, Julie Montano. Medical folder. Birth record. Child's name, Alex Montano. Father's name, left blank. Alex looked at Jonathan. No words. Only stillness. And understanding. That same day, the system registered a final access attempt from Evelyn's credentials. She tried a recovery channel. The response was simple. Unrecognized. By the following morning, she found. Her private keys were revoked. Her archive was wiped. Her apartment listed for sale. The corporate funds she diverted had been reversed. The transfer note read, "Return to source." No one came. No explanations. Everything simply ceased to exist. And Jonathan? He didn't look back. He waited. Because now that all cards were on the table, a different game had begun. Alex stepped out of the office. His phone lit up with a new contact. The message read, "You were never a pawn. But you waited too long to move. The next step is yours."